Hey everybody, it's Dr. Bain again. I am recording about ancient Rome. Give you a little bit of some tutoring today on that. So again, just as a disclaimer, this does have a copyright, this presentation, so that if you would like to purchase this or use it in your own classroom, go ahead and go to Student Savvy, search for them at Teachers Pay Teachers, and you can go ahead and begin collecting items for whatever you need it for. Okay, so today with ancient Rome, Rome is so important for many different reasons. You may have heard, well, why did it fall? Well, I'm kind of getting to the end of it, but it was so great. If it was such a great civilization, why did it fall? Well, ultimately it fell within. They didn't have enough power to control half the world that they controlled. So we're going to get into that too. We're also going to talk a little bit about geography and their government systems. So here we go. So what about the geography of the landscape? They had less rugged mountain ranges than Greece, which did not divide their communities. So Greece had city-states. And because of the mountain ranges, it kind of kept those city-states together. Well, Rome didn't have that. They had much more land for farming. So if you've got a lot of food and a lot of people, you can feed your people, you can grow an army, you can trade. Rome was also built on 7 hills and was easily defended. Okay, so from a military standpoint, it was so advantageous for the Romans to pick this location, to stay in this location. So during the Roman Republic, the Romans expanded, conquered land, and fought in the Punic Wars. The Roman Republic eventually collapsed, and triumvirates came into power. So government with 3 people of equal power. So Rome split to 2, Eastern and Western Rome, and then a new series of emperors came into power, and Rome became the Roman Empire. So a lot changed. They expanded, then they had to break up their power to 3 different individuals, and then they were split. So this great nation and this great civilization, just like all civilizations, changed throughout history. So the people of Italy were strongly influenced by the Greeks and the Etruscans. The Romans eventually overthrew the Etruscan king and became the new republic. So what does the daily life in ancient Rome look like if you were there? They're very practical. They governed, created laws, and built roads that took them to other lands. They were also conquerors of lands and were able to maintain control of the land that they took over. The Etruscans and Greeks both settled in Italy. The early development of Rome was most influenced by the first. Rome during 753 and 509 BC, and again, BC is in the negatives on the timeline, was under control of different kings. The last 2 were Etruscans. During this time, Rome was under their rule. So 509 BC, Romans overthrew the last king and became a republic. A republic is a form of government where the power is held by the people. This is so important. You'll need to know this. And they're elected representatives. There is no monarch. Okay? After the last king was overthrown, Rome entered a new era. They created a new government, laws, and became a strong, powerful country. Okay, so here's some power words. What are some vocabulary words that you might need to know? So what's a plebeian? They were a class of Roman commoners made up of minor landowners, farmers, merchants, and craftsmen. What's a consul? a chief executive in Roman government, a praetor, official in Roman government who is in charge of enforcing civil law. And what is a republic? A form of government where the leader is not a monarch and some of the citizens can vote. That's key there. Some of the citizens can vote. Patricians, major landowners who form the ruling class. The 12 Tables, the first code of laws in ancient Rome, adopted in 450 BC. A law of nations evolved from natural law or law based on reason, and the Senate, a group of patricians who would serve government for life. Okay, so they served for life. So a dictator is an absolute ruler. Think of Julius Caesar. An imperator, commander of the Roman Republic. Triumvirate, government run by 3 people with equal power. And the Pax Romana, the peace that existed between the nationalities of the Roman Empire. So Latin. What was Latin? Latin was the language of the ancient Romans. So we hear of Jesus at this time, founder of Christianity. The New Testament, books in the Bible describing the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, and the Punic Wars, armed conflicts between ancient Rome and Carthage. So the Roman Republic was surrounded by enemies and began with warfare, and it lasted for the next 200 years. Rome conquered Latin states, and by 264 BC, they conquered the Greeks as well as southern Italy. The Romans during this time were able to keep control and rule of Italy. Duty, discipline, and courage were traits the Romans had. They allowed states to run their own affairs. However, the Romans would crush any rebellion, so that's how they were growing. As they would go and take over people, they would say these towns and regions, they'd say, listen, we're not going to kill you all. If you do what we tell you to do, and you pay your tribute to us, and you come to our aid when we say call and follow our rules, you can begin living. Keep on living the way you're living. But when you don't, that's when we're going to step in. So they built colonies, towns, and connected them so the army could move through and conquer areas. Romans maintained control by devising the Roman Confederation. They allowed some allies to improve their status and become Roman citizens. Romans made conquered people feel as if they were a part of Rome's success, and that's what made them successful, as that they made the people, oh yeah, you were conquered, but you know what? This is all for the greater good. And okay, so you're conquered by us. Well, let's go conquer some more people, and then whatever our victory is now your victory because you're a part of the Roman Empire now. So why were they able to rise so successfully? They had duty, discipline, and courage. That innate trait that you cannot be taught, and that's the drive. They allowed states to run their own affairs, and they wouldn't allow for rebellion. So it's like, hey, if you're going to rebel, we're going to kill everybody here. And they excelled in military accomplishments. You don't grow as large as the Roman Empire without being held to a high standard and having those accomplishments and a wonderful and strong military. So what are 3 ways which Romans are able to maintain control and rule Italy? Okay. They devised the Roman Confederation. The Confederation allowed allies to improve their status and become citizens, and they made people feel a part of this growing empire. Okay, so like in most of the videos that I do, there's a social hierarchy. The senators were at the top, then nobles and patricians, and then plebeians, and freedmen, and then slaves. So here's a timeline of ancient Rome. Okay, so 1000 BC, Latins enter the Rome region. 509 BC, the Roman Republic was created. So we're starting to see them gather together. 450 BC, the 12 tables were written. That was the first code of law. And 264 were the Punic Wars. 45 BC, the end of the Roman Republic. 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated. 79 AD, Pompeii was destroyed. And 1117, the Roman Empire is at its prime. So Christianity is given recognition in AD. And in 476 AD, the Roman Empire collapsed. And we could talk a lot about how Christians were persecuted in ancient Rome, but we're not going to do that in this lesson, but just know there's a lot more to that. So what about Roman law? Okay, they were built on principles. Okay, a person is seen as innocent until proven guilty. Does that sound familiar? As in the United States, accused people are allowed to defend themselves in front of a judge. Is that like the United States is built after? And the judge weighs all evidence before decision. That sounds like the United States too. So what you need to understand is that we are using these foundations of Greek and Roman civilizations and government. That's how we formed our government in the United States. Okay, so a little bit about the Punic Wars. Um, they were three major wars and they were fought over 100 years. So the Romans fought in battles to expand as well as protect their empire. Both Rome and Carthage were cities, were major powers, and they began to clash. A little bit more. So these are just the three wars. Um, and basically, in the final Punic War, Rome raised a new army and attacked the city of Carthage. The Roman army burned and demolished all of the buildings in Carthage. The war was over and Rome won. So it took over 100 years to win this war. Um, and then Hannibal of Carthage was considered one of the greatest military generals of all time. Okay, so the first triumvirate was 59 to 53 BC. The people in power, so it was Julius Caesar, Marcus, Crassus, and Pompey. Then Caesar, the other two died, and Caesar just became the dictator for about 10 years, and then it went to a second triumvirate. So the Roman Empire, they experienced great wealth, growth, and trade. Just to review a little bit about daily life, every household. So they had entertainment. Okay, they had their emperors. So think about this. They really did just have. They went and saw things. Um, the household was run by the oldest adult male. Women were in charge of all domestic duties. So many of these things we were already doing today, right? So we're taking after the societal normalcy in ancient Rome. I mean, we've all heard about the gladiators, so that's very interesting to see as well. So the Romans had slaves, but Their economy was farming. So the economy was focused on farming and trade. Most Romans were farmers. I think a lot of times we don't think that, but most of them were farmers. They would sell their crops in markets around Roman towns. They didn't have HEB back then. They had to pay taxes and money and with food. So it's like, well, if you don't have the cash, you're paying with something. And the rich owned a lot of property and made slaves work on it. So slave revolts, the largest slave revolt in ancient Rome was 73 BC. Remember, BC is in the negatives, where the gladiator Spartacus broke out in southern Italy. And there's like several movies. There was a series on it. So people have tried to recreate that in film. Many slaves over time revolted and murdered their owners, causing fear within the Roman communities. So what are some other contributions that the Romans did? So they built roads. I don't know if you've heard the saying, all roads lead to Rome. Okay, so they had established roads. They had aqueducts. So aqueducts were designed to carry water from rivers all the way to the cities. These giant arches kept the channels through the valleys and dipped through the land. Roman numerals, which we still see today, they created a 12-month calendar. Julius Caesar introduced the 12-month calendar with 365 days in the year. It's similar to the calendar we use today. Well, we have 365 days. We have a 12-month calendar. And this comes from that time period in ancient Rome. They also built colosseums, and then they had their own, obviously, Latin. Latin is what we call a dead language, but Spanish, French, and Italian comes from Latin. So probably one of the most famous things that you may hear out of ancient Rome were gladiators. So gladiators were slaves, and they could win. Many of them were slaves, and you could win your freedom by winning matches. So if you made enough money, if you won enough matches with people, then you could buy your freedom. So the contest between the trained gladiators were the central part of the Roman Colosseum. Okay. They were often slaves or condemned criminals and were trained to fight in special gladiator schools. Animal contests were held as well. The games were very violent and deadly. The Romans felt it was necessary to have the competitions to keep the masses entertained, so there would be fewer uprisings. So the spread of Christianity. In this time, during the Roman Empire, Christianity began as a strong movement within Judaism. So remember, we think around 4 AD is when many scholars believe that the birth of Christ was. So during the Roman Empire, Christianity began as a strong movement within Judaism. When citizens heard that Jesus had overcome death, Christian gained many followers in Jerusalem and throughout Judea and Galilee. Many Romans refused to follow Christianity, and Christians were hunted as criminals because they refused to worship the Roman gods. Even though Christianity was against the law during the time, the following grew rapidly. So a little bit more about Christianity. It appealed, and still does today, to all social classes, but at this time, especially the poor. Eternal life was promised to every citizen, no matter your history or status. So what was the cause of the fall of Rome? So it's invasions, military, plague, economic overexpansion, and religion. So to touch on religion real quick, Christianity shook the core of Rome. They were polytheistic. They believed in many different gods and goddesses. So when Christianity came in, it really just shook the core and that dynamic. They overexpanded. They spread themselves too thin. With a vast territory, they controlled over half the known world at the time. The empire struggled to stay afloat. There weren't enough troops to protect all that land. Remember, all this time ago, thousands of years ago, there wasn't a cell phone. There wasn't, many people couldn't read and write. So if you needed to get a message to someone had to physically take it. Write it, piece of paper, parchment, and take it there. So there wasn't that communication. There were no cars. You know, if you had a horse, you were blessed. So we're talking about slower. So if one military faction needed something, it took a little long for them to get that support. So they had a shortage due to the plague, and there weren't as many military personnel as what they needed. Okay. And financial problems made it difficult to enlist more soldiers, so Rome just couldn't afford to pay them. If you're not getting paid, you're not going to go, right? The plague may have assisted in finishing off the Roman Empire. Scientists and researchers did uncover that the plague bacterium in grave sites. So that's some of the new evidence that's come out. We talked about invasion. So Germanic tribes and barbarian groups successfully sacked Rome. The Visigoths in 410 and the Vandals in 455. And then economic, there was a decline in trade and small industry. Farm production and military enlisting declined from economic collapse. Okay, so all these reasons caused the fall of Rome. Okay, notice that only one is invasion. So it's like, you know, you hear that saying, sharks can smell blood and water, like one drop from a mile away or whatever it is. So when other tribes hear, oh man, you know, like Rome's got a lot of stuff going on, they're going to pounce on that. So just think of that. It wasn't like the Germanic tribes just came and just took over Rome. No, Rome had already fallen. It was breaking apart from within, and they took that advantage. So I hope this presentation has helped, and please reach out if you need anything, and good luck on your test.